And this is Mary Lake.
Hello.
And she is my co-host on Stories from the Vortex. So I'm assuming we're all here this morning to talk about the Big Finish audios.
Oh yeah.
How many of you are here because there was nothing better on the schedule and you paid your ticket to get in and wanted to do something for an hour?
Honesty.
Welcome. Maybe we'll turn you on to something.
Oh, yes. So, what we have here on the slideshow is an assortment of covers from Big Finish's various Doctor Who stories and ranges, and some of their spin-off stuff from Doctor Who as well. So for those who don't know, or just to give a kind of brief introduction to what Big Finish is, well, actually go ahead before I do that. How many people here know what Big Finish is? Very good. And I guess for you guys who don't know what it is, Big Finish is a company based out of the UK that produces full-cast audio dramas and audiobooks based on Doctor Who, Stargate, Highlander, Dark Shadows, Blake 7,
Survivors,
Sherlock Holmes,
Yeah.
Survivors,
The what?
what?
Survivors.
Survivors, Terry
yeah.
Nation series from the 1970s, which has just come out. Basically, if it's cult TV or some kind of very well-known fictional characters that are out of copyright, Big Finish has produced audio stuff based on them. For the purposes of this panel, we're going to primarily focus on their Doctor Who output. So, and to kind of give some backstory, Big Finish started in 1999 doing Doctor Who audios. They originally got their license because of a spin-off character from Doctor Who called Bernice Summerfield, who was introduced in the Virgin New Adventures novels from the 1990s. Big Finish had initially attempted to get the Doctor Who license, weren't able to because they did not have a product to present to the BBC, so they went and adapted 2 of the Doctor Who novels and took the Doctor out of them. And those sold well enough that impressed the BBC enough for them to get the license to do it. Since 1999, Big Finish has released at least 1 Doctor Who story a month as part of what they call the monthly or main range. As of the moment, I believe they are up to 183
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
releases, and they will, as of next year, pass their 200th release in the main range. The main range is primarily what they do. There's one that comes out a month. Well, they do 13 releases a year. Usually around September or December, they do 2 they release 2 in a month. I don't quite know why that is the case, but they are British.
Christmas special.
I think there's something about it's modeled on what Doctor Who magazine does, and the Doctor Who magazine brings out 13 issues a year, but I don't understand it either. But what they were successful in doing to begin with was they convinced Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy to come back and reprise their roles on audio. Now, it's worth noting that when we mention audio here, a lot of people tend to think of audiobooks, somebody just reading out a story. The British have continued a long-standing tradition of audio drama. And I think the best way I can describe it is think of it as a movie or a TV show without the pictures. Think also old-time radio, but as movies and TV technology has moved on, the abilities of what you can do on audio have moved along as well. A lot of what you can do now digitally in post-production, changing voices around, sound effects.
Oh, yeah.
As I said, basically think of it as a movie or a TV show without the pictures.
Full cast, big sounds. Yeah, it is. It's like a movie in your head.
Radio theater.
Yes, radio theater is probably the best way of putting it. Which the British have had a very strong tradition of. Even today, the BBC still broadcasts radio dramas on a very regular basis. But it's something that's basically died out here, though, because of the internet. It's starting to make a comeback here. But Big Finish have been doing it for 15 years now. They'll be celebrating their 15th anniversary in September of doing Doctor Who. Now, their first release was a story called The Sirens of Time, which is a multi-Doctor story, and since then, they moved on for about the next year or so doing a couple stories each from each of those. Big Finish's first big success that got them noticed, though, was in late 2000 when they announced that they had successfully secured Paul McGann to do audios for them. And from January 2001 through April, they released their first season of stories with Paul McGann. Now, whereas with the previous Doctors before then, they had very much been filling in what you might call a missing adventure slot, sort of a hole in the TV series, as it were, where you could stick an adventure between story X and story Y, without necessarily, tearing a huge hole in the fabric of, the Doctor Who universe. Paul McGann, they felt they were really doing a continuation of the series, and it's really, the next slide here is an example of that. That they could really pushing the show forward. They introduced for him a new companion because there were rights issues surrounding the TV movie that kept them from using the companions from that, named Charlie Pollard, played by India Fisher, who became, I think, one of Big Finish's longest standing companions.
Yeah.
She has, in fact, now got her own spin-off series that was just released last month, I believe. So, and to a certain extent as well, so they were able to push forward with him. And you think about, particularly now in the new series with these big epic series finales, the Paul McGann audios really are where they pioneered that. Russell T. Davies has in fact said that the companions of the new series would not be able to have been done had Big Finish not done characters like Charlie Pollard first. Now, as well as pushing forward with Paul McGann, they were able particularly to rehabilitate Colin Baker's Doctor. For those of you who know the classic series and watched it, Colin Baker's Doctor could be very irascible, quite unlikable at times. And that was never really the way Colin himself really wanted to play the part. He was basically doing as he was told. His Doctor was, to a certain extent, very unlikable. You think about his relationship, for example, with Perry, they do nothing but bicker all the time, especially in those first stories. Colin Baker, when he signed on to do Big Finish, said, "I do not want to do that. Let's do something different." And starting with their 6th story, The Marian Conspiracy, really have rehabilitated his Doctor. And also the fact that on audio you don't have to stare at that coat. Helps as well. And I think it's really in the Big Finish audios that Colin Baker's Doctor has shined. Speaking of the coat, in some of the audios they actually took him out of that multicolored coat and put him in a blue coat. There's actually an action figure based on that, which is kind of surprising. But they continued sort of doing that. Now, when the new series came back in 2005, there was a lot of speculation Big Finish were going to lose their license. But instead, they have pushed on, and they've in fact really now released more since the new series came back than they did prior to that point. I mean, they have kind of gone from strength to strength. An example of that, here is the cover for this story from Doctor Who Unbound. Let me see if I can go back to that for just a moment. There we go. Doctor Who Unbound was done originally for the 40th anniversary in 2003. And the notion was to do a series, as the title may suggest, of what-if stories set outside the standard Doctor Who continuity. This story is in fact a sequel to the first that they did, a story called Old Mortality, which asked the question, probably the most obvious Doctor Who what-if question of them all: what if the Doctor and Susan had never left Gallifrey? And it sort of picks up with actor Jeffrey Belden here, who was originally considered for the part in 1963, and eventually did get to play the role 40 years later in this audio. And he actually does a fairly good William Hartnell as well. So it's kind of, that's what they did. Now, the second story they did may be of interest to those of you who know the new series, called Sympathy for the Devil. Because of who's in its cast, it featured David Warner playing an alternative Third Doctor, Nicholas Courtney playing an older brigadier who's kind of, you know, with the Third Doctor having not been around in the Unit era, had to deal with alien invasions all the time with no success, and has basically been disgraced and is living kind of in a sort of exile and running a bar in Hong Kong. But the supporting cast includes David Tennant playing his replacement as a unit colonel named Birmingham Wood, and also features Mark Gatiss playing the Master. And it is fantastic.
It's a great story.
I think it regularly shows up on lists of the best things Big Finish have done. So if you wanted, even though it's outside the typical Doctor Who continuity, if you want an example of what Big Finish can do at its best, in terms of actors, in terms of writing, in terms of the sound design, that is an absolute one to go for. And you can get the CD of that off the Big Finish website for about $10 with shipping, or you can buy the download version for $5.
It's even cheaper than that. It's in there for Big Finish for a $5.
Yeah.
It's that now. So
Yeah.
it's about
Yeah.
$7 over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, with shipping, I think it's closer to 10,
Is
but
it?
you know,
Yeah.
it's very reasonably priced given it's a single CD and it's like 78 minutes worth of story. And if you really want an example of what we were talking about earlier of audio theater and a movie in your head, that is, I think, a prime example of that.
It's really a shame they haven't continued the Unbound. There's, what, 8 of them, I think?
Yeah, they did 6 initially,
Yeah.
which also featured, there's a story featuring Derek Jacobi as well. It's not really a Doctor Who story. It's kind of a what if Doctor Who had never been a TV series, had it been, you know, canceled sort of at the pilot stage, and features Derek Jacobi playing a writer named Martin Bannister, who was
Rob
working on the show.
Shearman's Deadline?
Written by Rob Shearman, yeah, Deadline. There's one with with Michael Jaston returning to play the Valyard called He Jests at Scars, which actually uses the original intended ending of Trial of a Time Lord as its jumping off point. And just, you really get, I think, a much better sense of Michael Jaston and of that character from that story.
There's even a female doctor among the Unbound.
Yeah, it's a story called Exile, which features Arabelle Weir, I believe is her name, playing a female third doctor who, for those of you who've seen the Patrick Troughton story, The War Games, he's captured, he's put on trial by the Time Lords. And the whatever that story jumps off by him basically committing Patrick Troughton's doctor committing suicide at the end of that. And apparently when Time Lords do that, they regenerate into the opposite sex they were. And ends up fleeing to Earth, stuck working in, I think, basically the British equivalent of Walmart.
Yeah.
That story is an acquired taste, to put it mildly. There's people like myself who cannot stand that story whatsoever, but I know people who absolutely love it. So we will respectfully agree to disagree, sir.
Excellent.
Yeah, and another sidestep that Big Finish took is picking up on the old scripts of the TV series that were never made, and they call them lost stories.
I've got one here somewhere.
Yeah, and you did flash through.
Which includes, those right there, which is what would have happened.
Featuring one of the guests, Andrew Cartwell, one of his scripts.
Yeah, to kind of give a basis for this, these are stories that were originally conceived. This range ran from, I think, 2008 through the end of last year, covering stories from each of at one point or another, stories from each of the first 7 Doctors. Mm-hmm. Now, these were, by and large, scripts, but also storylines originally conceived for the TV series that, for various reasons, were simply never made. They actually made what should have been Sylvester McCoy's 4th season on audio. Andrew Cartmel actually returned to the role of script editor for those, and he, in fact, wrote 2 of them and co-wrote the last one with Ben Aronovich called Earth Aid. This is the 3rd story from that McCoy season, Animal, which also features the return of Brigadier Bambera, played by
Angela Bruce.
Angela Bruce, thank you, from the earlier McCoy story, Battlefield. And also introduced the character that was at one point thought was going to be Hayes' replacement, Ray. This is the actress playing her here, Beth Chalmers. So they've also done such, I guess, well-known lost stories as the stories originally intended for Colin Baker's 2nd season before the show was put on hiatus. Masters of Luxor, which was the original intended 2nd ever story of the series. A bunch of storylines from basically a lot of the storylines and stuff that were originally conceived have now been adapted for audio. Everything from, they even did 2 of the 4th Doctor Lost Stories as well in a big box set. Just a note on the Lost Stories, for Doctors 4, 5, 6, and 7, they are full cast audio dramas, adapted from the original TV scripts. Because of the fact that William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, and John Pertwee are no longer with us, and Big Finish, by and large, have been against recasting roles, I think, for quite obvious reasons. Those stories are told kind of more in the form of an enhanced audiobook. It's sort of a cross between what we think of as an audiobook, but also having the kind of the sound effects, and even bringing in other actors to read in other parts that you would expect from the full cast audio dramas.
Yeah, but told as a story.
Yes, but told as a story, whereas, as I said, 4, 5, 6, and 7 tend to be done as full cast stories, as this is. So, I'll start this playing again. So, but Big Finish have also done a whole sense of other ranges. There's a range, for example, called the Companion Chronicles. Now, the notion of that was that was originally set up because of the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the first 3 Doctors are no longer with us. And also that for a very, very, very long time, Tom Baker did not want to work with Big Finish. As a result, in 2007, they began releasing these. And these are actually stories told by the companions from those first 4 Doctors, relating sort of unseen adventures from those eras. And I think it's very much done in the format that they are telling you a story, more with that. And also bringing in another actor generally. Oh, hold on. This is an example of the Companion Chronicles. This is the one released in November of 2013 for the 50th anniversary, which you may have guessed since it's called The Beginning. This is a story that actually is the what happens after the events that we see with Clara in Name of the Doctor. where she tells them to get in the TARDIS. Now, I did not realize this when I downloaded this to put this on here. This is the original cover that was put up for it to be released. Big Finish had no idea that Name of the Doctor was going to include that scene. And as a result, they had to get Caroline Ford, who played Susan, back into the studio. Writer Mark Platt had to write a new sequence, and they actually changed the cover to have the TARDIS exterior seen in that episode. So it actually flows from that moment in the story now. And this is actually them going off into the universe on their first adventure, having left Gallifrey. It's actually part of a larger trilogy of stories they did as part of the 50th anniversary. The Dying Light, which is the second Doctor story that was released the month afterwards, and a fourth Doctor story called Luna Romana, which features Lalla Ward, who played the second Romana, and is it Juliet Landau, who's been cast as the third incarnation of Romana. Mary Tam was originally supposed to do that story, but she sadly passed away the month they were going to record the story. So, I mean, Big Finish record well in advance on some of these things. They will record sometimes years in advance to be able to get ahead of the release date for things. So I'll get this going again.
The joy of the Companion Chronicles is that in the TV series, the companion we know really very little about. There's just a yes doctor and what is this doctor and all that. But these stories flesh out their lives. And it's very interesting, especially the stories from the second Doctor era, Zoe and Jamie, because their memories were wiped at the end of his season. But so it's an interesting devices they use to try to stimulate those memories again. And that's kind of the crux of each story: is how did we get this? How did we get this memory out of you?
It's really a writer's showcase too. It shows off
very much so. I think that some of Big Finish's best output.
The Sarah Kingdom stories.
Yes.
Just
I'm trying to find.
There's usually a framing story around those.
Yeah, there's usually a framing story around it. There's one with Nicholas Courtney called Old Soldiers.
Yeah.
Here it is. Which is actually almost related, as you've met him in a pub, and he is actually telling you about this story, which is set between a couple of the stories from that first Pertwee season. Another really good example of that, I do have the cover in here somewhere, but I cannot find it at the moment.
Blast Post?
Yes.
Oh yeah, it showed there at one point.
Yeah, I know it showed it, but I can't find it now, which is kind of how it goes, I suppose. If somebody sees the thing, please feel free to shout. Because I know it's here, because it was just on screen a few minutes ago.
Something that is both a blessing and a curse with these stories is that there is also continuity.
Yeah.
There are stories that link to other stories, so it's kind of hard without some guidance to know exactly where to jump in and start listening.
Yeah.
And it's true in these Companion Chronicles too, that if one story is taking off, they will write more stories for that companion that continue the
kind of the arc and sort of picking up where that is. Yes, sir.
Wikipedia is good for that. You can look up any Big Finish story and it'll tell you which two it's set between.
Yes.
Okay.
Even if it's jumping off point as a TV episode, it'll say set between that TV episode and the following Big Finish story.
Big Finish, I guess we're talking about Big Finish has actually they've got enough output that they've actually got a continuity within their own.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. But to give an example of what you were talking about, Mary, of fleshing out companions, this is the last post. It was a Companion Chronicle released in late 2012, starring Caroline John as Liz Shaw. This was, in fact, the last story she recorded for Big Finish before she died. And it really fleshes out. Liz Shaw on TV, for those of you who know the Pertwee era, was created by one production team to be a scientist working alongside him in his exile. And then the next production team came in and did not know what to do with the character because it wasn't really what they wanted. And she was very much, I mean, literally you get to Pertwee, the last story of that first Pertwee season, she's there, and then they start off the next season and she's gone. And they make a one-line reference and they introduce the next companion. A real shame. Now, this is one of the joys of the Companion Chronicles, though, is for characters like that and Gene Marsh's Sarah Kingdom, is that they've had the opportunity to go in and flesh them out. The last post is set throughout that first Pertwee season, season 7, in between events inside each of those stories. And she's in fact, and this is the reason it's called The Last Post is because she's actually, in talking about fleshing characters out, it introduces her mother, Dame Emily Shaw, played by Rowena Cooper. And actually the whole story is banter back and forth between them, meeting each other or calling each other, writing letters to one another, actually making really good use of the format the Companion Chronicles have.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing companionship, she
That's a
and her
good
mother.
story.
Yeah, it is a very good story.
And they got such good reactions about it that they were writing more stories for her and her mother.
Yeah, they actually had commissioned a sequel right before Caroline John got ill and passed away. So, but I think to a certain extent, and without hopefully sounding churlish or inappropriate, which I think is what I said when we talked about this on the podcast not long ago, to a certain extent, because of what it does with her character and fleshing her out, and the fact that it really puts her character, that was really, I think, kind of undermined on the TV series a bit by nobody really knowing what to do with her. And she's actually the one who gets to save the day in the end.
Yes.
I think to a certain extent, it's kind of appropriate's going to sound bad, but I think if it was going to be her last story, I think this was the one to kind of go out on. Because I said it puts her front and center. It's a great performance from her and a great performance from Rowena Cooper as her mother, who's actually going to be returning in a Fourth Doctor audio next year alongside Tom Baker, which we actually haven't talked about him.
Besides of which, it's a great apocalypse story.
Yes. Which actually we have not talked about Tom Baker yet.
No.
Tom Baker, as we mentioned, right from day one at Big Finish when they got the Doctor Who license, really pushed for him to come and do stories with them. And they tried for a very long time to do so. In fact, 3 of their early stories for the main range, The Holy Terror, which was eventually done with Colin Baker's Doctor, Spectre of Lattimore, also done with Colin Baker's Doctor, and Stones of Venice, that was done for Paul McGann's Doctor, were all originally written at least at a storyline stage for him to consider doing. And there's a story that I think Gary Russell, who used to be involved with Big Finish, tells that they were at a convention and they were awaiting an answer and he was doing it now. He's like, yeah, those Big Finish people sent me three scripts and I put them exactly where they belonged, in the garbage. And yet those are, 2 of those are amongst Big Finish's best stories from Big Finish's early days. But Big Finish did try, they did try to get him to do their, we'll talk about Shada here in a minute. But they did try to get him to do, I think, Zagreus as well for the 40th anniversary, and just could not get him. He was not interested whatsoever. And then about 4 years ago now, he suddenly had a change of heart, apparently right in the middle of doing an interview for a podcast. Nicholas Briggs, who's involved with the company, he in fact wrote this story. He's also, for those of you who know the TV series, the voice of the Daleks, the Cybermen, the Jadoon. For those of you who saw Torchwood Children of Earth, he's the bald-headed government minister in that during the scenes in the cabinet room. Actually told the people who did the podcast to send him a copy of that clip because he did not believe it, having tried so hard to do it. And they finally got him in to do stories. This was the 4th release from their first season with him. I think, tragically, had he come just 12 months sooner, we could have had more stories with him and Elizabeth Sladen, more stories with him and Nicholas Courtney, more stories with him and Mary Tam. Mary Tam did record a full season of 7 stories with him, literally 6 months before she died.
And it is the best box set for the 4th Doctor.
It's not a box set. You keep thinking it's a box set. It's not a box
It's
set.
okay, all right.
It's a season, yeah.
It's a season. It's like 7 stories. Some fantastic stuff in there.
Okay.
David Warner is in 4 of those, playing this kind of really greedy businessman with Toby Hadoke, if anybody knows the excellent Moss Ate My Doctor Who scarf. If you don't know Moss Ate My Doctor Who scarf, it is $6 on iTunes. Stop what you're doing after the convention. Go get it. It is fantastic. It's basically him telling the story of basically growing up as a fan. It was based on his one-man comedy show. They kind of did a sort of full-cast version of it with Louise Jameson playing his mother. So it is well worth hearing if you get the chance. But I'm drifting off. But that's what I tend to do.
Wasn't it Louise who also had helped talk Tom into?
Yeah, because she had done a lot of work with Big Finish on the Companion Chronicles. They did actually a whole spin-off series set on Gallifrey. with her and Lila Ward's Romana, which
Mary
is
Tam, actually.
with Mary Tam
Mary
showing
Tam,
up in
yeah.
some of those as well. And actually, really tragically, Liz Sladen actually had agreed to do stories with Tom Baker. They actually were planning a whole season with her. And Russell T. Davies and the Sarah Jane Adventures production team had cleared it for them to be made, and she passed away, I think, within months of them announcing that they had him. Even more interesting, for those who don't know, him and Lila Ward, who played the second Romana, were married at one point after they left the show, and apparently did not part on the best of terms.
They work together on best of terms either, from what I understand.
Yes, very true.
But they're about to partner up.
But they're about to partner up. Big Finish have somehow, understandably, Big Finish do not want to talk about how they managed.
I'm not
it.
convinced they're ever in the same.
I was going to say, they're probably in
I think they're
different
recording
recording.
separately.
Probably in different recording booths on different days.
Don't they record in the studio near his home?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's sort of an idea of how much effort goes into recording these. Tom Baker's, as most of you may know, is now 80. So to record these audios, they actually go up to a recording studio in Tunbridge Wells, which is where he lives, and actually to record these stories. If they have to put because I know we met Ian McNeice, who's in one of them. Those of you who don't know him, he played Winston Churchill in Victory at the Dalles. He did the second story with Tom that Big Finish did, Renaissance Man. Actually told that he actually had to get on a train and go to basically go to Tom Baker's doorstep to record the story.
Had a wonderful, the 50th anniversary story that Big Finish did called Light at the End, which has all the doctors in it. I think it was only Paul McGann who could make it up to this, so that's why there's episodes in that story that are just the two of them.
But it's an excellent
Oh,
play
yeah.
between the two of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the fifth, so I guess since you brought it up, and I actually made sure to have this for the
Thank you.
slideshow. This is Light at the End. This is the big 50th anniversary release Big Finish did outside of their main range, outside of everything else. For anybody who was disappointed by the fact that basically they got, one old series Doctor and a bunch of clips in for Day of the Doctor, this is where you need to go. This has 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, all in the same story.
And
1, 2, and 3.
And 1, 2, and 3. It's
Three,
one
right.
time Big Finish have recast those first three. Primarily from what's been done in the companion chronicles, William Russell, who played Ian Chesterton on the TV series in the first Doctor era, does a wonderful William Hartnell. He doesn't quite capture the voice Hartnell had, but he captures sort of the vocal inflections and the way he spoke, which is fantastic. And Fraser Hines' Patrick Troughton has to be heard. He has gotten better and better as time has gone on doing the companion chronicles. It can be downright uncanny at times.
Close your eyes and
Yeah.
Patrick Troughton is there.
The one exception to that is an actor named Tim Treloar, who they got in to play the third Doctor in this, who does not sound like John Pertwee whatsoever. It has to be said.
Toby Hadoke does a phenomenal third Doctor. I don't understand why they haven't gotten him in to play him. He did it in an outtake on one of the DVDs, and he nailed it.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
But he has actually said, I don't think I do it very well. I don't think he's paying attention to himself.
There's
He's
even
great.
an actor that's in the Unbound series that I think does.
Trevor Littledale, who plays the
Oh.
head monk of a monastery in near where a plane crashes in Sympathy for the Devil.
He sounds just like.
Who he's also in the third Doctor, Destiny of the Doctor story they did, playing an alien in that. He sounds far more like John Pertwee than I think anybody Big Finish have tried to get in to do him. But this was the big 50th anniversary story. It is 2 CDs. It is, I think, just over 2 hours worth of story. It is big. It is epic. It has the Master in it, played by Jeffrey Beavers, who played the part one time on TV in Keeper of Traken. Now, speaking of actors who've really had an opportunity to spread their wings, as I said, this is him in the middle of the screen for anybody who does not know. I mean, as I said, he played that part once on TV. He is now really Big Finish's regular Master now. He originally played the part in the 7th Doctor audio in 2001 called Dust Breeding. I just ruined a cliffhanger for one of those episodes, so if you haven't heard it, you know what's coming now. He also did another story with Sylvester McCoy